My name is Kristen, and I'm 33 years old. 7 months into my pregnancy, I never imagined my marriage would unravel like this. When I married Thomas, I knew his daughter Lily would always be important, but I never expected to become invisible in my own home. The way his eyes glaze past me now when I speak, it hurts in ways I never knew possible. Before I dive into this heartbreaking story, let me know where you're watching from and tap that subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. I met Thomas at an art exhibition downtown 3 years ago. I was there showcasing some of my interior design work for a charity event, and he approached me with genuine interest in my minimalist approach to small spaces. He introduced himself as an architect who specialized in sustainable building design. There was something immediately comforting about his calm demeanor. His eyes were kind behind his glasses, and he spoke with such thoughtfulness about his work and passion for creating beautiful, functional spaces. We exchanged business cards initially, thinking we might collaborate professionally, but when he called 2 days later, it was to ask me to coffee. Our conversation flowed effortlessly for hours. Thomas was intelligent, attentive, and had this wonderful way of making me feel heard. By our third date, he shared that he was a single father to a daughter named Lily. Thomas explained that his ex-wife, Jessica, had passed away from breast cancer 3 years prior. The way his voice softened when he talked about how he and Lily had weathered that storm together touched my heart. Their relationship seemed so beautiful and unbreakable. He showed me pictures of Lily on his phone. She was a pretty teenager with long brown hair and her father's thoughtful eyes. Thomas described their Friday movie nights, their weekend hiking trips, and how they had helped each other through their grief. I admired how devoted he was as a father. In my previous relationships, I had dated men who treated their children as burdens or weekend obligations. Thomas was different. Fatherhood was clearly the role he cherished most. I found his dedication incredibly attractive. When I finally met Lily, she was polite but reserved. At 14, she was navigating that tricky territory between childhood and adolescence. She answered my questions with short responses and maintained a careful distance. Thomas had prepared me for this, explaining that Lily had been protective of their father-daughter bond since losing her mother. I made a conscious choice not to force anything. I never tried to replace her mother or insert myself as an authority figure. Instead, I focused on building a friendship with her. I invited her to help me pick out fabric samples for a client project. I asked her opinion on color schemes. We went shopping together for school clothes, and I let her take the lead on styles she liked. When I cooked dinner, I asked for her input on the menu. There were moments when I thought we were making real progress. One Saturday, we spent the afternoon making homemade pasta together. Lily seemed to enjoy teaching me her mother's recipe for marinara sauce. She actually laughed when I made a mess of the flour, and for those few hours, the tension that usually hung between us seemed to dissolve. After dating for a year, Thomas proposed. We had a small, intimate wedding in his backyard with just close friends and family. Lily served as her father's best person, looking beautiful in her navy blue dress. During the ceremony, she handed us the rings with a smile that seemed genuine, and I allowed myself to hope that we were turning a corner in our relationship. Moving into Thomas' house felt both exciting and intimidating. The home still held so many memories of Jessica. Her artwork hung on the walls, and photographs of her with Thomas and Lily were displayed prominently throughout. I understood and respected that her memory would always be part of their lives. Gradually, I made small changes to make the space feel like mine too. I rearranged some furniture and added a few decorative elements that reflected my taste. Thomas seemed fine with most of my adjustments, though he was hesitant about moving any of Jessica's things. Even after we were married, Thomas and Lily maintained many of their traditions. They still had their Friday movie nights, and every other weekend they would go on father-daughter outings. I was rarely invited to join these activities. At first, I understood they needed their private time to maintain their bond. I used those opportunities to catch up with my friends or work on projects. But as months passed, I began to feel like an outsider in my own home. When I discovered I was pregnant, my emotions were a mixture of joy and anxiety. Thomas and I had discussed having children someday, but we hadn't been actively trying. I worried about how this would affect my relationship with Lily, but I was also excited about expanding our family. I planned a special dinner to share the news with Thomas. His initial reaction was surprise, followed by what seemed like genuine happiness. He hugged me tightly and said, "Wow, a baby. That's amazing." His eyes shimmered with tears as he placed a hand on my still flat stomach. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Telling Lily was more complicated. Thomas insisted we tell her together, which I appreciated. We sat her down in the living room after school one day. When Thomas shared the news, Lily froze. She stared at us for what felt like an eternity before mumbling congratulations with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She asked to be excused shortly after and spent the rest of the evening in her room. That night marked the first noticeable shift in Thomas' behaviour. Instead of staying downstairs with me to discuss baby names or plans for the nursery, he went upstairs to check on Lily. He stayed in her room for over an hour. When he finally came to bed, he seemed distant, lost in thought. When I asked if Lily was okay, he simply said, "She's processing. Give her time." But time only seemed to make things worse. Thomas began cancelling plans we had made together so he could attend Lily's school events or take her shopping. When I reminded him about our first ultrasound appointment, he frowned and said, "That's the same day as Lily's science fair. You understand how important this is to her, right?" I went to the appointment alone. The technician asked where my husband was, and I felt a knot form in my throat as I made excuses for him. When I brought home the ultrasound picture, eager to share this milestone, Thomas glanced at it briefly before returning to helping Lily with her homework. The picture ended up on the refrigerator, but I was the one who put it there. As my pregnancy progressed, I tried to include Thomas in decisions about the baby. I asked for his input on names, nursery colours, and baby furniture. His responses were always vague. "Whatever you think is best, Kristen. I trust your judgment." On the surface, this seemed supportive, but I began to realise it was actually disinterest disguised as confidence in me. What hurt most was watching him pour endless energy and enthusiasm into Lily's activities, while showing almost none for our growing child. He would spend hours helping her prepare for a school presentation, but couldn't spare 10 minutes to look at baby cribs online with me. The contrast was becoming more painful by the day. Around my 4th month of pregnancy, Thomas' behaviour shifted from merely prioritising Lily to actively excluding me. He began cancelling our weekend brunch dates because Lily suddenly needed help with a school project. He skipped our childbirth classes because they conflicted with Lily's basketball practice. When I expressed disappointment, he would say, "Can't you go with Samantha?" or "Why do I need to be there?" They just tell you to breathe, right? The most hurtful part was his absence from prenatal appointments. After missing the first ultrasound, I hoped he would make an effort to attend the next one. I marked it on our shared calendar weeks in advance and reminded him several times. The night before, he casually mentioned he couldn't make it because Lily had an important basketball scrimmage. "You promised you would come to this one, Thomas," I said, feeling tears well up. He sighed as if I was being unreasonable. "Kristen Lily is counting on me to be there. This game is important for her team placement. You can tell me everything the doctor says when you get home." I went alone again. The technician remembered me and asked about my husband once more. This time I couldn't hold back a tear as I explained he couldn't make it. She gave me a sympathetic look that only made me feel worse. When I returned home with new ultrasound photos showing our baby boy more clearly, now I found the house empty. Thomas had left a note saying he and Lily went out for ice cream after her game. They didn't return until evening, and neither of them asked about my appointment. Meanwhile, Lily's attitude toward me grew increasingly cold. When I would speak to her at dinner, she would either ignore me completely or respond with one-word answers while looking at her phone. If Thomas noticed this behaviour, he never addressed it. One morning, I cheerfully asked Lily how she slept, and she looked right through me as if I hadn't spoken. When I asked if she wanted breakfast, she walked past me to the refrigerator, took out some orange juice, and returned to her room without a word. I mentioned this to Thomas later. His response was frustrating. "She's a teenager, Kristen. They all go through moody phases. Don't take it personally," but it was clearly personal. When Thomas spoke to her, Lily was animated and engaged. The contrast between her behaviour with him and with me was stark and deliberate. Small incidents began occurring that seemed too coincidental to ignore. I had carefully collected fabric samples for a new client project and laid them out on the dining table. The next morning, I found them soaked with water. Lily claimed she had accidentally knocked over her glass while studying late at night. Another time, I prepared a special breakfast smoothie with ingredients recommended by my doctor for pregnancy nutrition. I left it on the counter while I went to answer a phone call. When I returned, the glass was empty. When I asked Lily if she had seen what happened to it, she shrugged and said, "Maybe you drank it," and forgot. Most concerning were the incidents involving the baby items I had started collecting. A package of newborn onesies I had ordered went missing from the front porch, though the delivery notification confirmed they had been dropped off. The pregnancy books I kept on my nightstand would mysteriously end up in different rooms or back on the bookshelf. When I brought these issues up with Thomas, his response was always the same. "You're being paranoid, Kristen." Lily wouldn't do things like that. He suggested that pregnancy hormones were were making me overly sensitive and forgetful. I began to doubt myself. Was I imagining these things? Was I being unfair to Lily? I spent hours researching how teenagers cope with new siblings, especially in blended family situations. I read about the fear of replacement and abandonment that stepchildren often experience. I tried to be more understanding of Lily's position and give her extra space. I reached out to my parents for advice, but they lived across the country and had only met Lily a few times. My mum suggested family counselling, but when I mentioned this to Thomas, he dismissed the idea immediately. "We don't need a stranger telling us how to handle our family dynamics," he said firmly. Thomas's parents, especially his mother Margaret, were frequent visitors to our home. Margaret had been very close to Jessica and often spoke about what a wonderful mother she had been. These comments always came with a pointed look in my direction, as if to evaluate whether I would measure up. Margaret clearly favoured Lily and often took her side in any disagreement. If I mentioned that Lily had forgotten a chore, Margaret would jump in with, "The poor girl has so much schoolwork. You shouldn't burden her with household tasks." She never directed these protective instincts toward me, even as my pregnancy advanced and simple tasks became more difficult. My friend Samantha began to notice changes in our relationship. During a lunch date, she asked why Thomas hadn't joined us as he occasionally did before. When I explained he was taking Lily shopping for school supplies, Samantha frowned. "Doesn't Lily have school supplies from when you bought them last month?" she asked. I had forgotten about that shopping trip until she mentioned it. I had indeed purchased notebooks, folders, and pens for Lily just weeks earlier. When I confronted Thomas about this, later he brushed it off. Lily needed special art supplies that weren't on the regular list. It was easier to just take her myself. Each explanation seemed reasonable on its own, but together they formed a pattern that became increasingly difficult to ignore. I was being systematically sidelined in my own family, and the foundation of my marriage was beginning to crack. By my 6th month of pregnancy, my belly had grown significantly, and the reality of needing to prepare a nursery could no longer be postponed. I had been researching nursery designs for months and had created a digital mood board with ideas that balanced functionality with soothing aesthetics. When I finally brought up the subject with Thomas, his response blindsided me. "We need to start getting the baby's room ready," I said one evening after Lily had gone upstairs to do homework. "I was thinking we could convert the guest room this weekend." Thomas frowned and set down his laptop. "Actually, I don't think that's a good time. Lily has midterms coming up and she needs a quiet house to study." I tried to be reasonable, but her midterms are 3 weeks away and we have so much to do before the baby comes. We need to paint, assemble furniture, organise all the baby things. "Can't you just wait until after her exams?" Thomas pressed. "This is a crucial time for her academics." This pattern continued for weeks. Every time I suggested working on the nursery, Thomas found a reason why it wasn't convenient for Lily. Her study time, her sleep schedule, her weekend plans all took precedence over preparing for our child. Finally, after nearly a month of delays, Thomas made a suggestion that left me speechless. "Why don't we just use your home office for the baby? That way we won't disrupt Lily with all the construction noise." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My home office was essential for my interior design business. It housed my computer drawing table, fabric samples, and client files. It was where I took video calls with clients and suppliers. "That's not an option, Thomas," I said firmly. "I work from that room. It's how I earn my living." He shrugged as if my career was a minor consideration. "You could set up in the kitchen or living room, couldn't you?" "It wouldn't be forever, just until the baby is older." And where exactly would I put all my design materials? The drafting table, my client files. I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You'll figure it out," Thomas replied dismissively. "We all have to make sacrifices when a baby comes." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. Thus far, I seemed to be the only one making sacrifices. "You mean I have to make sacrifices?" I said. "What exactly are you sacrificing, Thomas, or Lily for that matter, that triggered our first major argument since I'd become pregnant?" Thomas accused me of being selfish and not considering Lily's needs. I countered that he wasn't considering mine or our unborn child's. The fight ended with Thomas storming out to drive Lily to a friend's house, leaving me alone and in tears. The stress began taking a toll on my physical health. At my next prenatal checkup, which I again attended alone, my blood pressure was elevated. The doctor expressed concern and asked about stresses in my life. I broke down and shared some of what was happening at home. "Pregnancy should be a time when you're supported and cared for," the doctor said gently. "Do you have anyone who can help you reduce this stress?" I thought about my parents who lived thousands of miles away and my friends who had their own busy lives. I felt incredibly alone. The doctor recommended rest stress reduction techniques and more frequent monitoring due to the risk of pregnancy-induced hypertension. When I got home and shared the doctor's concerns with Thomas, he seemed momentarily worried. But when I suggested he could help by taking on more household responsibilities and supporting me emotionally, his concern quickly evaporated. "You're overreacting," he said. "Women have been having babies forever." My mum had 3 kids and never complained about blood pressure. The following week brought another painful incident. Thomas had finally agreed to attend a prenatal appointment with me, one where we would see a detailed ultrasound of the baby. I was excited to share this experience with him. The night before, I laid out my clothes and went to bed early to ensure I'd be rested. The next morning, Thomas came into the bedroom while I was getting ready and said I forgot that today is Lily's important basketball practice. Coach said scouts might be there and she really needs me to drive her. "You promised Thomas," I said, my voice shaking. "This appointment has been scheduled for weeks. I know, and I'm sorry, but this is a huge opportunity for Lily. You understand, right?" I didn't understand. Not anymore. I called an Uber to take me to the appointment, fighting tears the entire ride. The ultrasound technician was kind, pointing out our son's features, his tiny hands and feet, the strong beat of his heart. It should have been a joyful moment, but all I felt was a profound sense of loneliness. When I returned home, neither Thomas nor Lily asked about the appointment or the baby. They were in the kitchen laughing together as they made sandwiches. Thomas glanced up when I entered and said, "Hey, there you are. We're having lunch. Want one?" No mention of the appointment. No questions about our son. It was as if this pregnancy existed in a parallel universe, that they occasionally acknowledged but never truly entered. Lily's behaviour toward me had grown increasingly bold. She no longer bothered to hide her disdain. One evening, as I passed her in the hallway, she wrinkled her nose and said, "You smell weird now that you're pregnant." Another time she complained loudly to Thomas that the smell of the chicken I was cooking made her nauseous. "Can we just order pizza instead?" she asked him, not even looking in my direction though. I was standing right there. Thomas immediately reached for his phone to place an order, leaving the meal I'd spent an hour preparing to go to waste. Thomas seemed blind to these small cruelties, or worse, complicit in them. He continued to indulge Lily's every whim, buying her expensive new clothes and the latest iPhone model, while suggesting we should be budget-conscious about baby items, because they'll only be used for a short time. He regularly took Lily out for dinner at her favourite restaurants without inviting me. When I mentioned feeling excluded, he said I thought you'd appreciate the quiet time at home in your condition. My condition. As if pregnancy was an illness that kept me housebound, rather than a normal life event we should be experiencing together as a family. The final straw in this escalating situation came when Thomas allowed Lily to host a sleepover with 4 of her friends on a night when my doctor had specifically advised me to get rest. The girls were loud well past midnight, playing music and laughing. When I asked Thomas to please ask them to quiet down, he told me to use earplugs or sleep in the guest room if it bothered me so much. That night, lying alone in the guest room with pillows over my head to muffle the noise, I realized how completely my needs had been dismissed in my own home. Something had to change, but I wasn't yet sure what that would be. About a month before my due date, I was home alone, attempting to organize baby clothes in what would eventually become the nursery if Thomas ever allowed it to happen. Lily was at basketball practice and Thomas was at work. As I was putting away some of Lily's old textbooks that had been stored in the closet, a small journal fell out from between them. I recognized it immediately as Lily's diary. The cover was purple with silver stars and her name was written across the front. I set it aside, respecting her privacy, but as I placed it on the desk, it fell open and my name in all capital letters caught my eye. Kristen is trying to replace Mom. I froze, feeling a wave of guilt and curiosity wash over me. I knew reading someone's diary was an invasion of privacy, but seeing my name so prominently displayed made me pause. After an internal debate, I decided to read just the page where my name appeared. I told myself it might help me understand what was happening and how to fix our relationship. What I read shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces. Lily's entry was dated shortly after we announced my pregnancy. Dad promised me that no one would ever replace Mum. He said I would always be his number 1 girl. But now Kristen is having a baby and everyone will forget about Mum completely. I hate her. I hate the baby too. Dad spends so much time pretending to care about her pregnancy, but when she's not around, he tells me not to worry, that nothing will change between us. He promised me again yesterday that I'll always be his number one no matter what, but I don't believe him anymore. I'm going to make sure Kristen knows she doesn't belong here with us. The entry continued with a list of things Lily had done to make me uncomfortable, hiding my things, ruining my work materials, throwing away mail addressed to me. She even admitted to deliberately spilling water on my fabric samples and pouring my pregnancy smoothie down the sink. But what hurt most was reading that Thomas had been encouraging this behavior by constantly reassuring Lily that she came first, even ahead of his unborn child. According to Lily's diary, he had been telling her one thing to her face while presenting a completely different front to me. With shaking hands, I flipped through more pages. In a recent entry, Lily had written, "Dad says Kristen is just emotional because of the baby. He says we just need to humour her until after the birth, and then things will go back to normal. He said maybe she'll be so busy with the baby that she'll leave us alone more. Mum would hate seeing Dad with another woman's baby. I know she would. Sometimes I wish Kristen would just disappear." I closed the diary feeling sick to my stomach. I carefully returned it to where I had found it, my mind racing. I needed to confront Thomas about what I'd learned, but I knew I couldn't admit to reading Lily's diary. He would use that to deflect from the real issue, his betrayal. That evening, when Thomas returned home with Lily, I waited until she went upstairs to do homework before approaching him. "Thomas, we need to talk about Lily," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm concerned about her feelings about the baby." He looked annoyed immediately. "What are you talking about? I've noticed her behavior toward me has gotten worse since the pregnancy. I think she's afraid of being replaced, and I'm worried about how she'll react to the baby." Thomas's expression hardened. "That's ridiculous. Lily is fine. She's just adjusting like we all are." I pressed on, careful not to reveal my source. "Has she talked to you about feeling like she might be replaced in your life?" A flash of something. Guilt perhaps crossed his face before he composed himself. "Of course not. And even if she was worried, it would be natural. I've reassured her that nothing will change between us." "Nothing will change," I repeated, feeling my heart sink. "Thomas, everything is going to change. We're having a baby. That changes everything for all of us. Not between Lily and me," he said firmly. "That relationship is sacred." His choice of words felt like a slap. "And what about our relationship? What about your relationship with our son?" Thomas stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "You're overreacting again, Kristen. Lily is my daughter. Of course I'm going to protect her and make sure she feels secure. Even at the expense of your wife and unborn child," I asked, tears forming in my eyes. "Don't be dramatic," he snapped. "This isn't a competition." But it was. I had been unknowingly competing with Jessica's memory and with Lily for Thomas's attention and care since the beginning. And it was a competition I was clearly losing. A few days later, Margaret came for dinner. The evening was tense from the start. Lily was unusually animated, putting on a show of helping set the table and engaging Margaret in conversation about school. I noticed that she referred to Jessica as Mum, several times watching me from the corner of her eye for my reaction. During dinner, Lily suddenly said, "Kristen yelled at me today for no reason. I nearly choked on my water. I had barely spoken to Lily all day, let alone yelled at her." Before I could defend myself, Margaret jumped in. "What happened, sweetheart?" she asked, shooting me a disapproving look. Lily crafted an elaborate lie about how I had screamed at her for leaving a towel on the bathroom floor. I was dumbfounded by the boldness of the fabrication. "I never yelled at you, Lily," I said calmly. "We haven't even spoken much today." "See," Margaret said to Thomas. "She's calling Lily a liar now." Thomas looked between us, then said to me, "Kristen, Lily doesn't make things up. If she says you yelled, then you probably did. Maybe you don't remember because of your pregnancy brain." The unfairness of it all overwhelmed me. I excused myself from the table and retreated to our bedroom, where I sobbed into my pillow. No one came to check on me. Later that night, after Margaret had gone home and Lily was in her room, I decided to check Thomas's phone while he was in the shower. I had never done anything like this before, but I was desperate to understand what was happening. I found a text conversation between Thomas and his mother that confirmed my worst fears, Margaret. "I'm worried about how Kristen is trying to push Jessica out of the picture. Thomas, I know. I'm trying to balance everything, but it's hard. Kristen doesn't understand that Lily will always come first." Margaret, "Are you sure you're ready for another child? It seems like Kristen is trying to compete with Jessica's memory by having this baby." Thomas, "Sometimes I think the same thing. I'll make sure Lily knows she's still my priority. I was thinking maybe she could stay with you for a while after the baby comes, just until things settle down." I put the phone down feeling numb. When Thomas came out of the bathroom, I confronted him directly about the messages. "You think I'm competing with Jessica? With a dead woman," I asked, my voice breaking. "I've never tried to replace her. I've respected her memory and her place in Lily's life. How dare you accuse me of using our baby as some sort of competition?" Thomas's face darkened with anger. "You went through my phone. That's a violation of my privacy." "What about your violation of our marriage?" I shot back. "You've been undermining me with Lily, making promises that I'll never be as important as she is, treating me like I'm disposable." "You don't understand what Lily and I have been through," he said defensively. "And you don't understand what it's like to be pregnant with a man who clearly doesn't want this baby," I replied, the truth of those words hitting me as I spoke them. "Do you even want our son Thomas?" His silence was answer enough. I slept in the guest room that night, my mind racing with difficult decisions I never thought I'd have to make. 3 weeks before my due date, I woke in the middle of the night to excruciating pain. It was different from the Braxton Hicks contractions I'd been experiencing, deeper, more intense. I also noticed a small amount of bleeding, which terrified me. "Thomas," I called out, shaking his shoulder. "Something's wrong. I think I need to go to the hospital." He grunted and rolled over, still half asleep. "What time is it?" "It's 3 a.m, I gasped through another wave of pain. "Please, I need help." He sat up slowly, fumbling for his glasses. "Are you sure it's not just those fake contractions? The doctor said you might get those." "This is different," I insisted, clutching my belly. "And there's some bleeding. Please, we need to go now." Thomas sighed heavily but got out of bed. "Let me check on Lily first." "Thomas," I pleaded. "This is an emergency." He ignored me and walked down the hall to Lily's room. I heard their muffled conversation as I struggled to put on clothes, leaning against the wall for support when another contraction hit. When Thomas finally returned, he said Lily's upset about being woken up. "She has a math test tomorrow." I couldn't believe my ears. Did he really expect me to care about Lily's math test when I was potentially losing our baby called Samantha? "To stay with her," I said through gritted teeth. "We need to go now." Thomas frowned. "It's the middle of the night. We can't call people at this hour." The pain intensified and I doubled over. "Then call an ambulance because I'm not waiting any longer." That finally seemed to pierce his complacency. He helped me downstairs and to the car, though he moved with none of the urgency the situation demanded. On the drive to the hospital, while I breathed through contractions, Thomas voiced his main concern. "Who's going to take Lily to school in the morning if we're still at the hospital?" I didn't dignify that with a response. At the hospital, the medical team sprang into action. My blood pressure was dangerously high and they diagnosed me with preeclampsia, a serious pregnancy complication. The doctor explained that they needed to perform an emergency C-section to save both me and the baby. As they prepped me for surgery, a nurse asked if my husband would be joining me in the operating room. I looked at Thomas, who was standing awkwardly by the door checking his phone. "Will you come with me?" I asked suddenly, feeling very small and afraid. He looked up from his phone with a conflicted expression. "Actually, I was thinking I should go home. Lily has that test tomorrow and she'll need breakfast and someone to drive her." I stared at him in disbelief as tears filled my eyes. The nurse looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, your wife is having an emergency C-section. Your child is about to be born." Thomas shifted his weight from foot to foot. "I know, but Lily has this really important test and she's been studying for weeks. She needs me too." The nurse's expression hardened. "She needs you, sir," she said, nodding toward me. "There are schools all over the country. There's only one birth of your child." Thomas reluctantly agreed to stay, though he continued checking his phone throughout the preparation. As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I asked if he could call Samantha to let her know what was happening. He nodded distractedly. The surgery itself was a blur of fear and discomfort. Thomas stood near my head, but seemed detached from the entire experience. He didn't hold my hand or offer words of encouragement. When our son's first cry filled the room, I felt an overwhelming rush of love despite my physical distress. Thomas glanced at the baby with what looked like mild interest rather than the awe I'd expected. They placed our tiny son on my chest briefly before taking him to be cleaned and examined. He was smaller than expected due to being 3 weeks premature, but his cry was strong. While the doctors worked to close my incision, Thomas stepped out to make a phone call. He returned just as they were transferring me to recovery and announced I called Margaret. "She's going to take Lily to school, but I should probably get back for when she gets home. Will you be okay here?" I couldn't even formulate a response. The anesthesiologist who had overheard intervened. "Sir, your wife has just undergone major surgery and your son is premature. They both need you right now." Thomas looked annoyed at being challenged. "Lily needs me too. She's just a kid. The next few hours passed in a haze of pain medication and medical checks. Our son, whom I named James, was taken to the NICU for observation due to his premature status and low birth weight. Thomas stayed at the hospital but spent most of the time in the waiting room on his phone. He came in periodically to check on me, but always had one eye on the clock. By late afternoon, he announced he had to leave. Lily will be home from school soon, and she'll be worried if no one's there. I'll come back tomorrow. I was too exhausted and heartbroken to argue. Shortly after he left, Samantha arrived, her face etched with concern when she found me alone. "Where's Thomas?" she asked, setting down a vase of flowers. "He went home to be with Lily," I said, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. Samantha's expression shifted from surprise to anger. "He left you here alone after you just had emergency surgery?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I told her everything that had happened, all the feelings I'd been bottling up for months. "Kristen, this isn't right," she said firmly. "What he's doing, it's neglect of you and your son." For the first time, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge the truth in her words. Thomas had been neglecting me, and now he was neglecting our child. This wasn't a phase or an adjustment period. This was who he was choosing to be. Samantha stayed with me that night, sleeping uncomfortably in the chair beside my bed. Thomas called once to check in, but spent most of the conversation telling me about Lily's math test and how stressed she'd been. The next day, he visited briefly, spending more time looking at his watch than at our son in the NICU. He left after less than an hour, explaining that Lily had a basketball game he couldn't miss. It was Samantha who held my hand as I cried. It was Samantha who advocated with the nurses to let me see James more often. It was Samantha who brought me clean clothes and helped me shower. My parents, who lived across the country, were arranging to come as soon as possible, but it would be several days before they could arrive. When the doctor came to discuss my discharge 3 days later, he asked about my support system at home. I hesitated, not wanting to admit that my husband had essentially abandoned me and our newborn. Samantha stepped in. "She's coming to stay with me for a while," she said decisively, making the decision I hadn't been able to make myself. She and the baby both. The doctor nodded, clearly relieved. "That's good to hear. You'll need significant help for at least the next few weeks, especially while your son remains in the NICU." That afternoon, I texted Thomas to tell him I would be going to Samantha's upon discharge. His response was telling, "That's probably for the best. Lily has been having a hard time with all this change. No concern for me. No concern for his premature son still fighting in the NICU. Just Lily. Always Lily." In that moment, something hardened inside me. I realized I needed to protect not only myself, but also my innocent son from a man who had shown he was incapable of true love for either of us. After spending 5 days in the hospital, I was discharged while James remained in the NICU. True to her word, Samantha took me to her apartment. The first night away from the hospital was difficult. I was in pain from the C-section, anxious about James, and heartbroken over the collapse of my marriage. Samantha set me up in her spare bedroom, making sure I had everything I needed within reach. Thomas's absence was conspicuous. He had visited James in the NICU only twice, both times for less than 20 minutes. He texted occasionally asking for updates, but never mentioned coming to see me at Samantha's. When I asked if he wanted to visit James together, he replied that he was busy helping Lily prepare for a piano recital. After a week at Samantha's, my parents finally arrived from Arizona. They were shocked by my physical and emotional state. Mum gasped when she saw me, thin pale with dark circles under my eyes, despite Samantha's excellent care. "Oh, Kristen," Mum whispered, hugging me gently. "Why didn't you tell us how bad things were?" I broke down then, telling them everything. The neglect, the favoritism, the subtle and not so subtle ways Thomas and Lily had pushed me aside. Dad's face grew increasingly stern as I spoke, while Mum wiped away tears. "This is abuse," Dad said flatly. "Emotional abuse and neglect." Mum nodded in agreement. "We're taking you and James home with us as soon as he's released from the NICU. No arguments. For once, I didn't have the energy to be independent. I needed my parents' help and protection. I agreed to their plan, provided we could consult a lawyer first about the legalities of taking James to Arizona. 2 days later, James was finally strong enough to leave the NICU. It was a bittersweet moment, joyful to have my son fully in my arms, but painful that his father wasn't there to share the milestone. Thomas had texted that morning saying he would try to come, but had to take Lily shopping for her recital outfit first. He never showed up. My parents and Samantha were with me when the nurses gave us final instructions for James's care. They helped me gather all his things and settle him into the car seat we had purchased just days before. As we prepared to leave, a nurse, who had been particularly kind throughout our stay, pulled me aside. "I don't normally do this," she said quietly, "but I wanted to give you my personal contact information. If you ever need a statement about your husband's absence during your son's NICU stay, please reach out to me. I've documented everything." I thanked her, touched by her foresight and support. That interaction was the final confirmation that what I had experienced wasn't normal or acceptable. Even strangers could see the wrongness of Thomas's behavior. Back at Samantha's apartment, I contacted a family law attorney recommended by one of her co-workers. The lawyer, Rachel Torres, agreed to see me the next day. My parents would bring James to meet the lawyer while Samantha took a day off work to drive me there, as I was still unable to drive after the C-section. Rachel listened intently to my story, taking detailed notes. When I finished, she looked me straight in the eyes. "What you've described is a clear pattern of emotional neglect and abandonment. The fact that your husband left you alone after an emergency C-section and barely visited his premature son in the NICU will not look good to any family court judge. But he'll fight for custody," I said, voicing my greatest fear. "He'll say I took James away without permission." Rachel shook her head. "Based on what you've told me, he's shown minimal interest in James. But yes, we need to do this properly. I recommend filing for legal separation immediately with temporary full custody of James. We'll document everything: the hospital stay, the NICU records, text messages showing his absence and lack of concern." I left Rachel's office with a plan and a renewed sense of purpose. That evening, my parents and I discussed logistics for moving me and James to Arizona until I could get back on my feet. Dad would stay in town to help us pack up my essential belongings from Thomas's house, while Mum would help care for James at Samantha's. The next day, while Thomas was at work and Lily was at school, Dad and I went to the house to collect my things. I had made a detailed list: clothes, personal documents, my work materials, and the few baby items that were already there. Dad insisted on coming inside with me, concerned about my physical limitations and emotional state. The house felt strangely foreign, as if I'd been gone for months rather than weeks. Walking into what should have been the nursery, still set up as a guest room, I felt a fresh wave of grief for all the normal pregnancy and newborn experiences I'd been denied. As we packed my belongings, I noticed that some of my things had already been moved to the garage. My framed diplomas, once hanging in the hallway, were stacked in a corner. The throw pillows I had chosen for the living room were gone, replaced by old ones from before I moved in. It was as if Thomas was already erasing me from the home. In our bedroom, I found most of my clothes still in the closet, though pushed to one side to make room for what looked like new outfits of Thomas's. My toiletries in the bathroom had been boxed up and placed under the sink. The message was clear: I was already being displaced. I was carefully packing my jewelry when I heard the front door open. Thomas's voice called out, "Kristen, are you here?" Dad stepped protectively into the hallway while I continued gathering my things. I heard their tense exchange as I quickly finished packing. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" Dad asked, his voice calm but firm. "This is my house," Thomas replied. "I have a right to know why you're taking things. We're collecting Kristen's personal belongings," Dad explained. "She's been staying with Samantha while recovering from major surgery, as you know." I stepped into the hallway, then a box of photo albums in my arms. Thomas looked at me with surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to actually be there. "You look fine to me," he said dismissively. "I don't see why you couldn't have come home. Lily's been asking about you." The audacity of his statement left me momentarily speechless. Dad stepped in. "She had an emergency C-section and you left her alone in the hospital. Your son, was in the NICU for over a week and you visited twice. Don't pretend this is about Lily asking for her." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "You don't understand our family dynamics." I found my voice. "There is no family dynamic, Thomas. There's just you and Lily and then me and James as afterthoughts. I've tried for months to make this work, but you've made it clear where your priorities lie. So you're just taking off, running away, taking my son," he demanded. "Your son," I repeated incredulously. "The son you've seen twice since he was born, the son whose name you haven't even said once." In this conversation, Thomas had the grace to look momentarily ashamed before rallying. "I've been dealing with a lot. Lily's been struggling with all these changes." Dad put a hand on my shoulder. "We should go, Kristen. We have what we need for now." As we carried the boxes to Dad's rental car, Thomas followed us, alternating between angry accusations and attempts at emotional manipulation. "You're breaking up our family," he said. "What about Lily? Have you even thought about how this will affect her?" I paused at the car, turning to face him one last time. "I've thought about Lily constantly, Thomas. I've tried to build a relationship with her from the moment we met. I've respected her feelings and her space. I've made excuses for her behavior and yours, but I won't sacrifice my son's well-being or my own for someone who has made it clear they don't want me in their life. This isn't what I want, Thomas protested, his tone softening. Come home. We can work this out. For a brief moment, I felt the pull of what might have been the family I had imagined we could be. But then I remembered James, tiny and perfect in the NICU, with no father present to welcome him into the world. I remembered lying alone in a hospital bed after major surgery, checking my phone for messages that never came. You've shown me what you want, Thomas, I said quietly. And it isn't me or James. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. As Dad drove away, I watched Thomas standing in the driveway looking lost. Despite everything, part of me ached for what could have been. But a stronger part knew I was making the right choice for myself and my son. Back at Samantha's, I found Mum gently rocking James while she sang softly to him. The sight of them together, my mother lovingly caring for my child, brought fresh tears to my eyes. But these were different. These tears carried relief and the first fragile threads of hope. That night, I received a barrage of texts from Thomas, ranging from angry accusations to pleading apologies. I showed them to Rachel, who advised me not to respond except with a single message, directing all communication to go through her from now on. The next day, Margaret called, her voice sharp with indignation. How dare you take Thomas's son away after everything he's done for you? I let her rant for a few moments before interrupting. Margaret, your son left me alone after emergency surgery and barely visited his newborn in the NICU. He has shown repeatedly that Lily is his only priority. I won't subject James to growing up feeling unwanted in his own home. You're being selfish, she snapped. Lily needs her father. Yes, she does, I agreed. And nothing I'm doing prevents that. Thomas can continue to be exactly the father he wants to be to Lily. But James deserves a father too, and since Thomas has shown he's not interested in that role, I'm doing what's best for my son. After hanging up, I blocked her number, following Rachel's advice, to limit contact with Thomas's family during the legal proceedings. 3 days later, Thomas was served with papers for legal separation and temporary full custody of James. His response was swift and aggressive. He hired an expensive lawyer who immediately filed a counter-motion claiming I had abducted James and was alienating Thomas from his son. Rachel was prepared for this. We submitted affidavits from the NICU nurse's text message records showing Thomas's lack of involvement and medical documentation of my difficult recovery that Thomas had ignored. The temporary custody hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to the hearing, I focused on healing physically and bonding with James. Each day, he grew stronger and more alert. His tiny hand would curl around my finger as I fed him, and sometimes I caught a glimpse of what looked like a smile. In those moments, I knew with absolute certainty that I was fighting the right battle. The day before the hearing, Thomas's lawyer contacted Rachel with a settlement offer. Thomas would agree to me having primary physical custody if I stayed in town and ensured liberal visitation with both James and Lily. The offer shocked me, not because of its terms, which were fairly standard, but because it mentioned Lily at all. I had no legal relationship with her. When I questioned this, Rachel explained, he's trying to use Lily as leverage. He knows you care about her, and he's implying that access to James might be contingent on you maintaining a relationship with her. The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost laughable. I declined the offer and proceeded with the hearing as planned. In the courtroom facing Thomas across the aisle, I felt a strange sense of calm. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, reviewed all the evidence carefully. She questioned Thomas directly about his absence during the birth and NICU stay. Thomas's explanations sounded hollow even to my ears. I had family obligations, Your Honour. My daughter needed me. The judge's expression remained impassive. Mr. Hensley, are you suggesting that your teenage daughter's needs superseded those of your wife recovering from emergency surgery and your premature newborn son, Thomas, shifted uncomfortably? It was a difficult time for everyone. I was trying to balance multiple responsibilities. The judge looked skeptical. Mr. Hensley, parenting often requires making difficult choices. The evidence suggests that when faced with those choices, you consistently prioritized one child over your wife and other child to the point of medical neglect. By the end of the hearing, the judge granted me temporary full custody of James with supervised visitation for Thomas. She also approved my request to relocate temporarily to Arizona with my parents, provided I returned for any further court proceedings. Thomas's face was a mask of shock and anger as the ruling was announced. Outside the courthouse, he approached me as I was leaving with my parents and James. This isn't over, Kristen, he said, his voice low. "You can't keep my son from me." "I'm not keeping him from you, Thomas," I replied calmly. "The judge ordered supervised visitation, which you're welcome to exercise. But based on your actions so far, I'm not convinced you actually want to be James's father." "Of course I do," he protested. "He's my son." "Then prove it," I said simply. "Show up, be consistent, put his needs first sometimes. That's all I've ever asked." As we walked away, I felt a weight lifting. For the first time in months, I wasn't responsible for managing Thomas's feelings or making excuses for his behavior. I was free to focus on what mattered most, healing myself and caring for my son. The next day, we flew to Arizona, beginning a new chapter in our lives. It wasn't the future I had imagined when I married Thomas, but as I watched the landscape change beneath the plane, I felt a growing sense of possibility. Whatever came next, James and I would face it together. 6 months after leaving Thomas, I was settled in a small but comfortable apartment near my parents' home in Scottsdale. The desert landscape outside my window couldn't have been more different from the lush greenery of the Pacific Northwest, where I had lived with Thomas, but the change felt right. Like the desert plants that survived harsh conditions, I too was learning to thrive in unexpected circumstances. I had gradually rebuilt my interior design business, starting with remote consultations for my old clients and slowly building a new clientele in Arizona. Working from home allowed me to be present for James, who was growing into a happy, healthy baby. His smile lit up my world each morning, making every difficult decision worth it. Thomas had followed through on his threat to fight for custody, but his efforts were half-hearted at best. He had attended only 2 of the scheduled supervised visits with James in the first 3 months, claiming work conflicts or Lily's activities made travel difficult. Each missed visit strengthened my case for maintaining primary custody. My lawyer Rachel had helped negotiate a more permanent arrangement. I would retain primary physical custody of James, while Thomas would have 1 weekend per month of visitation, gradually increasing as James got older. Child support was set based on Thomas's substantial income as a successful architect, though he had initially tried to argue it should be reduced because of his obligations to Lily. The judge had been unmoved by this argument. "Mr. Hensley," she had said, "your financial responsibility to both your children is not diminished by your personal prioritization of one over the other." Thomas's response to this arrangement was inconsistent. Some months he would appear for his visitation weekend, seeming genuinely interested in connecting with James. Other months he would cancel at the last minute or send Margaret in his place, which I politely but firmly refused, as the court order specified visitation with Thomas, not his mother. The most surprising development came 3 months after our move to Arizona. I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a handwritten letter from Lily. "Dear Kristen, I don't know if you'll read this, but I needed to say I'm sorry. I was horrible to you when you lived with us. I was scared of losing Dad to you and the baby, and I thought if I made you feel unwelcome, you'd leave. I never thought about how it would affect my brother. Dad's different now. He's sad a lot, and I think he regrets how he treated you. He won't admit it, but I can tell. I found him looking at the only picture we have of James the other day, and I think he was crying. I'm seeing a therapist now. She's helping me understand that my mum would have wanted me to be kind to you and James. She wouldn't have wanted me to push you away. I know I can't fix what I did, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry. If it's okay, I'd like to know my brother someday. Lily." The letter moved me deeply. I remembered the confused, grieving girl who had seen me as a threat, and my heart ached for her. After discussing it with my therapist, yes, I had finally started therapy myself, I decided to write back to Lily. I kept my response gentle and open, acknowledging her apology and expressing my hope that she could have a relationship with James when the time was right. Our correspondence continued sporadically over the next few months. I shared photos of James with her and asked about his school and activities. We were building a fragile bridge across the chasm that Thomas's choices had created. Thomas himself seemed to be undergoing a transformation, though more slowly. After missing 2 consecutive visitation weekends, he called me directly rather than going through our lawyers, as had been our practice. "Kristen," he said, his voice lacking its usual defensive edge, "I wanted to talk to you about James." Is everything okay?" I asked immediately, concerned. "Yes, well, no, not really." He paused and I could hear him take a deep breath. "I've been seeing a therapist too. Lily's doctor suggested it might help us both. And I've realised some things about how I've been as a father, to both my children." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. I was so afraid of failing Lily after Jessica died that I overcorrected. I promised her things I shouldn't have made her my whole world in a way that wasn't healthy for either of us. And then when you got pregnant, he trailed off. You didn't have room for another child, I finished for him. It sounds terrible when you say it like that, but yes, he admitted. I was terrified that loving James would somehow be disloyal to Lily and to Jessica's memory, so I just shut down, pushed away the whole idea of being a father again. The honesty was unexpected and somewhat disarming. Why are you telling me this now, Thomas? Because I want to do better, he said simply. For James, for Lily too, actually. My therapist helped me see that what I've been doing isn't really helping her either. I've been teaching her that it's okay to treat people badly if they threaten your sense of security. That's not what I want her to learn. We talked for nearly an hour that night, the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Thomas didn't ask me to come back or suggest reconciliation, which was good because that door had closed for me. But he did ask for another chance to be James's father, and despite my misgivings, I agreed to give him that opportunity. Over the next few months, Thomas became more consistent with his visitations. He flew to Arizona regularly to spend time with James, actually showing up when he said he would. He sent thoughtful gifts, not extravagant displays, but items that showed he was paying attention to James's development. Soft books in contrasting colours, that James loved to touch a musical toy that played classical pieces since James seemed responsive to music. During one visit, Thomas brought Lily with him. The meeting was awkward at first, but watching Lily hold her half-brother for the first time, her face a mixture of wonder and regret, was a moment of healing for all of us. She had brought a stuffed elephant she had picked out herself, and the gentle way she presented it to James spoke volumes about the changes she was working through. "He looks like you," she said to me, surprising me with the observation. "He has your eyes." "He has your dad's chin, though," I replied, and she nodded, studying James's face more carefully. "I'm glad," she said softly. "I want him to have something from our side of the family, too. Our side, not just her side." It was a small shift in language, but represented a monumental change in perspective. Thomas's transformation wasn't perfect or complete. He still occasionally cancelled visits when Lily had major events, still sometimes slipped into old patterns of prioritization. But he was trying, and that effort meant James would have a father in his life, even if in a more limited capacity than I had once hoped. As for me, the journey of healing continued daily. The anger that had once consumed me gradually transformed into something more like acceptance. Thomas and I would never be the family I had envisioned, but we were finding a new way to co-parent that put James's needs at the centre. My parents remained my strongest support system, but I had also built new friendships in Arizona. Other single mothers in my building became confidants and occasional babysitters. My business thrived as word of mouth spread about my work. I was creating not just beautiful spaces for clients, but a beautiful life for myself and James. On James's first birthday, we had a small party at a local park. Thomas and Lily flew in for the celebration, and my parents and new friends joined us. Watching James smash his cake with gleeful abandon, surrounded by people who loved him, I felt a profound sense of peace. Later, as the party wound down and James napped in his stroller, Thomas approached me. "You've done an amazing job with him, Kristen," he said sincerely. "He's happy and secure. I know that's because of you." "Thank you," I said, accepting the compliment that once would have made me defensive. "But he's better off having you in his life too." "Consistently," I added pointedly. Thomas nodded, acknowledging the gentle reminder. "I'm trying to be worthy of him," he said, "and to teach Lily better values than I did before. She talks about you a lot, you know. I think you've become something of a role model for her, someone who stood up for themselves and their child." The irony wasn't lost on me, but I found no satisfaction in it. "I just want both of them to be healthy and happy, Thomas. Life's too short for anything else." As the sun set over the desert landscape, casting long shadows and painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I reflected on the long journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. There were still days when memories of my lonely pregnancy or Thomas's betrayal stung sharply. But those moments no longer defined me. In setting boundaries and choosing myself and James, I had discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. I had learned that walking away isn't always giving up. Sometimes it's the bravest step forward. I had discovered that family isn't always what we expect it to be, but can still be beautiful in its own way. Most importantly, I had found that healing doesn't mean forgetting the hurt or pretending it never happened. It means using that experience to build something new and better, carrying the lessons forward while leaving the burden of resentment behind. As James grows, I will teach him these truths. I'll teach him that love should never require diminishing yourself, that boundaries are not selfish, but necessary, and that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself as much as others. And in teaching him, I continue to learn these lessons myself every single day. In the journey of healing from betrayal, I've discovered that the most important relationship to repair is the one with yourself. Once you reclaim your own worth, everything else can finally fall into its proper place. If my story resonates with you, please share in the comments how you've navigated similar challenges in your relationships. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with someone you loved? What gave you the strength to do what was best for you? Don't forget to like and subscribe. If this story touched your heart, and share it with someone who might need to hear that. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the only way forward. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it.